Welcome to the Defence Property Podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things property investing and real estate for Australian Defence Force personnel. Whether you're looking to build and scale a property portfolio or relocating across Australia, we've got the insights and tips for less stress and more success. Let's dive in.
And welcome back to another episode of the Defence Property Podcast. First one for January. So this episode's probably recorded January, but going live early Feb, I'd say. So first one after the Christmas break. I'm here with no one other than Nadia Jury, my right-hand man. Welcome, Nadia. Good to have you back on.
Thank you. Thanks, Kane.
So how was the Christmas break? What did Discover get up to?
We're pretty quiet. I think that was good. Just we had a little bit of, we're still, doing work in the background, but just nice to just have a little bit of downtime there.
A couple of weeks to decompress a bit, keep an eye on just the few going through and whatnot. But
yeah, I usually have a plan of let's do all these things while it's quiet, but then I just go,
It's quite nice to sit around and do nothing every now and again, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everyone else went out holidays and doing things, and it was good to sort of get to the beach without the traffic. And today's episode, so 7 must-check items before your next purchase. Most property mistakes aren't made after settlement. Most property mistakes, they're made before the contract's even signed, selecting the market or the property, for example. So in this episode, we're walking through 7 critical checks that every investor should complete before buying a property, whether it's your first investment or your 5th. These all apply. This isn't theory. These are checks that separate portfolio builders from those who just own a property or own investment property. So some really good takeaways in there. So shall we jump into it?
So number 1, market fundamentals. So not the headline growth rate.
Cool. So what we're looking at there is check the market itself. You're buying the market, not the property, or you're buying the property, but it's the market that is going to cause the growth. There's that imbalance of supply and demand in the market, which is what we want to be buying to expect growth. So a lot of investors chase the fastest growing area, but if it's the fastest growing, it could be later in its cycle. They'll also buy media-driven hotspots, which can be flawed with errors like small towns that media really pumping up. 1-year growth rates, which is kind of like that fastest growing. So the fastest growing market's going to have the best performance over a historical 1 year. Or another one is, your property sprinklers and property sharks, which we're not short of here on the coast, is buying those growth corridors where a saturation of supply in that market, but they say it's that growth corridor because they're building roads, they're building estates, they're building McDonald's, they're building Bunnings, but ultimately...
Is it not the right time?
It's growth of region or area, but it doesn't mean it's growth of price. So, growth of price is going to come from those areas where they've got all that infrastructure already, the demand's already there.
Those media hotspots, is it sometimes a bit too late? They're kind of, by the time it's in the media?
Yeah, potentially, and they could still be good areas to buy. I guess the media is not in the business of property advice. The media is in the business of selling advertising. So the more clickbaity, punchy one-liners they can come up with. So they're probably basing their, media stories off those fastest growing areas that, could be late in their cycle. Not so much actually quality advice. So instead, when we are looking at a market or market fundamentals, we're looking at things like the economy, so how the size and strength of the economy, and also how diversified it is, not heavily reliant on one industry. The market size itself. So when we say the market size in regards to buying an investment property, we're kind of looking at the number of sales transactions in that area. So if we're filtering down 15,000 suburbs in all of Australia trying to buy an investment property, we're going to filter that down to a short list of what we buy. If we filter too tight and we're down to 1 or 2 suburbs, but the volume or market size is only 1 transaction a month, that 1 transaction a month could be flood impacted and then you can't buy it, or someone else pays a premium to get it because it's obviously tightly held. And if it's too tight of a market size, we could spend too long on the sidelines and opportunity cost comes in. I'm also looking at population and growth population infrastructure. So specifically when we're looking at infrastructure, we're talking about infrastructure per capita. So then we can compare a suburb or a region. So when we analyse markets, we're looking at LGAs, local government areas, and we're looking at suburbs. So if the infrastructure in a suburb of 15,000 is X dollars and it's the same amount of dollars in a suburb with 4,000, obviously there's more impactful on a per head count. So when we're looking at infrastructure, we always want to quantify it in a population per capita to really actually then allow us to compare different markets and different sizes. We then want to look at rental pressure. Key here is vacancy rates. We've probably touched on vacancy rates a fair bit in the past, but we're just...
So that's sort of under 2%? 2%, yeah.
Yeah, so we'd say as a benchmark, under 2% is good. Under 1% is a real high amount of rental pressure. 2 to 3 is kind of balanced, and anything above 3 is a no touch, somewhat fail. We also want to see increasing employment. We want to see the 10-year growth trend compared to the historical performance. And probably one of my favourites and most important is the affordability index. So market fundamentals, an area must be affordable for that local demographic to be buying there. And the affordability index is looking at median household price, median household income. It says how affordable is it for that local market. If the local market can't afford to buy there won't be enough demand or pressure on prices to expect growth. And the investors can't do all the heavy lifting if the owner-occupiers aren't there. So strong fundamentals tend to a smooth purchase and a long-term performing asset.
So you're not buying the property first, you're buying with the economy underneath it.
Correct. And then we're buying that economy and that market, and then we're buying the property within that market, and that's where the property analysis comes into it, like the due diligence and stuff.
All right, so I get into number 2, supply risk. What can still be built around you?
Yeah, this is really important. So one of the most misunderstood risks in property is supply risk. So before you buy, you must understand like the zoning and the allowable density, and the vacant land availability around it. So one of my favourite examples, in Sydney would be like the Bondi Beach. There's literally no vacant land there, or St Kilda in Melbourne, no vacant land there, or your eastern suburbs in Brisbane. There's literally no vacant land there. There's demands there. There was no magic wand that come down and said these suburbs are a median house price in the millions versus other areas that have got a much cheaper medium. It's because of the demand, and the demand there is why that median house price is higher. We also must understand the building approval ratios, which is additional supply coming to the market. So of all that vacant land that's around a suburb we're looking at, building approval ratio quantifies how many dwellings are going to be built in the next 2 years, because that's going to have downward pressure on prices. So supply being the enemy of growth, we want to pick these markets with the lowest level of supply possible. And finally, stock on market percentage and inventory. There are 2 metrics that we look at for existing supply levels. So understanding the supply is critical. And on diminishing supply, which is often a term in the industry that gets thrown around, diminishing or the trend line of the supply is really important. But if somewhere's got 20% building approval ratio over the next 20 years, that's a massive amount of new dwellings coming to the market. Even if it's diminishing from 20 to 18 to 16, it's going to take 10 years of being underwater for growth because of the pure saturation of new supply. So it must be low and trending lower, not high, but hey, it's getting lower. So it's still going to underperform. So yeah, an unlimited future supply is really critical for future performance.
So if demand increases here, can supply respond quickly, or is it constrained?
No, so we want to have price pressure, so low levels of supply. Like inventory is our metric where it expressed light stock on market. So stock on market, if 100% of a property was on the market at any one point in time, as a buyer, we could go to that suburb, lowball 10 properties and we'll get one probably. Whereas if 0% of property was on the market at any one point in time, as a buyer would have to wait. A listing comes available and there's probably other people waiting and would have to compete to buy that. So the lower level of supply, the more price pressure we can expect because there'll be people competing. Inventory looks at current demand levels. If there was a magic wand that comes over the suburb and says no new listings as of today, there might be 3,000 properties in that suburb and a couple of hundred listings maybe in that suburb. Inventory says if there was a wand that said no more new listings, how long does it take demand to absorb those 300 new listings until there was none on the market? So, anything under 3 months is quite good. And we're obviously looking at in markets where there's sub 1.5 months worth of inventory. So just making sure demand is going to outstrip our supply.
So getting to number 3. So cash flow reality, not the sales agent's advice.
Yeah. So, every sales agent that's selling your properties, obviously, they want to get a premium price and they want to present a premium rental appraisal, I guess, to go with that property. So it just looks better on the numbers. But what we're talking about here is essentially having our own analysis and education to, really analyse the actual return, I guess, or yield. So using real cash flow and realistic figures, not just optimistic and projected ones. So before buying, we want to look at rental yield, just the gross yield, and there'll be a suburb yield. But then obviously every property is different within the suburb. So we also want to look at the individual yield for that property. We also want to factor in some buffer rate. So we've spoken to the bank, whether we're an 80% lender, a 70% lend or 90 and 95, that's going to impact our interest rate. So whatever our specific interest rate is most likely on our pre-approval, we want to have a bit of a buffer on that as well. So I was looking this morning at the RBA website. They're projecting at the next RBA meeting an actual 29% of an increase with 71% chances of a no movement. So if we went back 3 or 4 months, they were actually projecting either a decrease or no movement. So now that tide's changed where they're projecting potentially there's more chance of an increase rather than decrease. So once we understand all that, we want to say, well, if my interest rate on my loan is 6%, we want to be able to factor in over the next 12 months or so if interest rates increase. So factoring in some interest rate buffers, maintenance and vacancy is important. So I don't think it was rare to presume we're going to always have 52 weeks occupancy a year. Ideally, we'll have a tenant that stays long term and, we'll get a good 2, 3, 4, 5 years where the one tenant stays there and we do have a high occupancy rate.
Yeah.
But the reality is your tenant will turn over every now and again.
You might have a little run of, it's changed every year for a couple of years, but then you finally
and then you get
a good one.
Good tenant. Yeah. So really just factoring in probably, I personally like to use 48 weeks. So I think if we average over 10 years of owning a property, we work off every single year for that 10 years, 48 weeks. You don't want to be too conservative, because then you're just selling yourself short and, increasing that, don't fudge the fudge factor. So definitely have something in there. And same as maintenance as well. That's going to be highly variable. So just having something in there to make sure that you've factored in a couple of little call outs of the plumber or whatnot. Yeah. And obviously property management costs, if you're choosing to self-manage or get a property manager to do it, if your rent that the tenant is paying is $500 a week, making sure that you're working out some cash flow based on that net yield or net rent that you're receiving.
That kind of varies state to state. I feel like there's
definitely
compliance components of different states or another. You just got to add those extra little costs in and things.
There's probably a whole episode we could do on just property management.
I think so, yeah.
We were talking the other day about the variance between contracts, B&Ps, deposits, cooling off periods, all that. There's probably a whole conversation to be had there. Maybe we could reach out to some of our, referral partners that look after client portfolios and bring someone into the studio. So, that would be good to get some people on.
Brainstorming episodes.
Yeah. So, but don't rely on best case scenario. Make sure you're factoring in real interest rates, factoring in your vacancy period and your maintenance. And then another really important one is don't rely on depreciation. A lot of property groups or sales agents that are selling your property, they're going to say depreciation is the be all and end all, and you've got 3 tenants, being the tenant paying rent, the tax man, and depreciation. Ultimately, tax should not be our primary motive. should just be an auxiliary benefit that we get from the property itself, because depreciation won't be there forever. And obviously we need to add it back if we're ever going to sell that property. So, in some cases, speak to your tax advisor or accountant, you might choose to not claim the depreciation if you're planning on selling the property in a short period of time. Obviously, building a portfolio, we have foundational long-term assets, and we can also have momentum style assets or shorter holds where we might flip or buy, renovate and sell in a, right growth period. But understanding the asset in the portfolio, how much depreciation is or isn't there, and just acknowledging that that's an added bonus, not an actual strategy.
So that cash flow is going to sort of keep you going long enough, and then, give, time for that growth to happen. So.
That's right. So cash flow allows us to hold the property. So we don't want to be buying premium $1.5 million assets in Sydney and Melbourne with 2% yields. We've got to have that balance. Like obviously growth is what will make us wealthy, but cash flow is oxygen for the portfolio.
Yeah.
So a good investment doesn't have to be cash flow positive, but it must be intentionally structured for the portfolio fit to allow us to build that portfolio from one. If one property is going to drain all your cash flow, it's going to be very hard to make that next purchase.
Yeah. Number 4, so property level due diligence, like what can go wrong?
Yeah. Many investors rush this, and I guess it's common for the everyday mum and dad investor or the accidental investor. They've paid the home off. They're just going to buy one property in their late 50s before retirement and hold it for 10 years and whatnot. The due diligence is sort of, it's got a nice shed. Well, yeah, non-existent, or it's that emotional driven due diligence. It's got a nice shed, a kitchen. I can see myself sitting on the deck having a beer or whatnot. The facade's pretty, but, they're, essentially irrelevant or aesthetical sort of emotional driven due diligence. What we're really looking at is building and pest reports. If they're available up front, that's great. Flood, bushfire, overlay risks, housing commission, density, easements and encumbrances, eyesores like power lines, substations, cemeteries, block size, the shape, the floor plan. Is the floor plan functional and doesn't meet the modern family requirements? Not buying, it's great to buy a property that's 50 years old, but if the toilet's separated out the back and you've got to walk through the hallway through the house to get to the bathroom from the toilet, it doesn't meet what people want these days.
I think some people have the idea that, it must have 2 bathrooms or something. As long as that one, if it does have one bathroom, it's just functional, like saying like the toilet's not out the back or something. But it doesn't necessarily mean people won't rent it just because it's got one bathroom. But
there's a big misunderstanding that a 1 bathroom or a 1 car property doesn't grow in value as much as a 4-bed, 2 bath or 2 car.
People won't rent that now.
Going back to point 1, we were just talking about it's the suburb that lifts the price, the imbalance of the supply and demand in the suburb. Purely just whether it's a 3-bed, 1 bath or a 4-bed, 2 bath, it's just understanding comparable sales analysis, making sure on entry to that market we pay the appropriate price for the asset's value. It's going to grow in value. There's no magic wand that says a 2-bathroom property will outperform a one bathroom property. It will move the suburb percentage-wise accordingly. It's just making sure that we pay the appropriate price on buying in there. Unplanned capital expenditure is one of the biggest destroyers of investors' confidence. So if you buy a property and it's on the flood impact, you could run the gauntlet and be fine for 20 years, or it could flood 2 or 3 years later and have a major expensive exercise in holding that property, and can really destroy your confidence as an investor. So getting the due diligence is really going to safeguard your portfolio. It's going to minimise vacancy. It's going to minimise turnover of tenant. And probably when you do get to that position of exit planning from your portfolio, what does the downsizing look like? You might be buying in a hot market and get good growth in the first few years. If we come to a point 10, 15, 20 years later, we want to sell, days on market sitting at 90 and you've got the ugly duckling on the main road, strap in for a long sales campaign and potentially a big vendor discount to get rid of that thing, which is the last thing you want to do if you're transitioning to retirement or whatnot.
Yeah. Number 5, rental demand quality. So who actually rents here?
Yeah, so just understanding, like we touched on earlier, the vacancy rates in that area. Not all rental demand is created equal. So using an extreme example is that mining town. It's all good when the economy and that industry or that suburb or region is heavily reliant on one industry. But when that industry dynamics change, you could have max exodus and no rental demand at all.
Yeah.
So understanding, I guess, the diversity of the economy is important. Is there a current shortage of rentals in that area? What's the current vacancy rates? What's the economy? So families, defence, young professionals, students. Is demand stable or transient? So things like holiday locations, the mining towns, those smaller economies. And what does the vacancy rates look like in the bad times? So it's always good, and we're going to try and pick markets where they're super tight when we buy. They're sort of having a look at if vacancies blow out from 1% to a long-term average of maybe 3%, what does that actually look like for you in your portfolio?
Yeah.
And just making sure they align with our long-term portfolio and goals.
So with your goals, you want them to lease faster.
Yep.
So that's why the vacancy rates are so important. Experience fewer vacancies just doesn't impact that cash flow so much. And then, you're not just buying a house, you're buying this rental business. So
100%, you're investing in the tenant as much as the property, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's also it's important to not get caught up on the yield at entry to a market. So if a yield is 4%, but we're buying in that area because we believe there's good fundamentals for price growth, rent comes with price. So rent will lag, but it might be 4% on entry. If we can outperform long-term price growth of 7% and get maybe 10% for the first couple of years, that's going to drag our yield up faster than the long-term average as well. So within a couple of years, we can have better rental growth, which is better cash flow on our portfolio.
Yeah.
So focusing on buying in the right market and letting yield improve over time.
Yeah. So number 6, exit strategy. So even if you never plan to sell the property, you still got to have that in mind.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's such an important one. Life events will occur. No one's got a crystal ball. Death, marriage, divorce, everything's going to occur over time. And at some point, having 2 or 3 investment properties, you might just say, I'm done with my career, I want to start a business. If you've got 3 or 4, 5 investment properties, you can sell one, dump some cash in the bank, pay your capital gains, put the leftover or the white meat in the bank and start your business. So having an exit strategy from your portfolio, the more properties you've got and the more diversified they are, the more markets you can assess when you want to sell one. And,
or
you
if
might
you have to.
Yeah, 100%. So who would buy this from me in the market? Is it a capital city? Is it a regional market? What's the percentage of renters to own occupiers in that suburb when you're buying? So understanding that's important. If we zoom out in all of Australia, 2/3 of every property is an own occupier, 1/3 no mortgage, 1/3 mortgage, 1/3 investment properties. But as we zoom down to an LGA level, or a state and then an LGA and then an individual suburb, that percentage will highly vary. Highly desirable areas, the level will have a higher percentage of own occupiers. So having an investment property in those areas is great because it's obviously quite desirable to live in, and people are committing to a long-term mortgage to buy there because there's a higher number of own occupiers.
Yeah.
So when our investment becomes vacant, there's going to be people lining up to rent that versus if we had an investment property and there was 70% renters in that suburb and it becomes vacant, there's obviously going to be more vacant stock on the market or in that suburb that we're going to have to compete with to get a tenant. So
what's good? 20-30% is okay of renters, but then going 50-60, that's
yeah. So definitely red flags over 50%. Under 50, under 40 is really ideal where we want to see it. But there's always exceptions, and there's no one suburb that's got 20 out of 20 perfect data points. I'd make reference here to someone like Douglas in Townsville or Annandale in Townsville.
Yeah,
you're within walking distance of the military barracks, the hospital and the university, three of the biggest sort of places where people want to rent because they can walk to the Ross River walking and parks, work and stuff. And there's always going to be rental demand there for career development, whether it's at the hospital, the university or the military barracks. So I would say up to 60% there would be fine or tolerable because you're always going to find that you'll get someone and then just lining up your lease. You might buy a property and the lease is due for renewal in October. you would offer the tenant maybe a 15-month lease to then bring that up to a January renewal.
Yeah.
When the rental market has the most amount of demand there, and that's when you're going to get an extra $10 or $20 a week in those markets. So, but really understanding the suburb before you buy is going to help with that exit strategy when it does come time to sell, and most importantly, if you're ever forced to sell.
So the best investments are easy to sell, even if you're never planning to. So.
Yeah, 100%. Just buying the right suburbs, and if it passes due diligence in a good suburb, think real boring bread and butter stock that has no,
I like that,
fancy things that are going to make it hard to sell. It's really great finding that quirky floor plan or design that you love, but is it going to appeal to the masses?
Yep. So number 7, strategic fit. How this property supports the bigger plan.
Yeah, pretty critical. Having that strategy and that plan in place first, making sure that the suburb and the property fit the strategy and the plan. A good example can be someone's budget. If they've got, say, 1.6 million to spend on property, you might say, well, you're going to have a bit of yield suppression at 1.6 million. Let's target 2 $800,000 properties where the yield's a little bit better. Too closer, think of those bread and butter style properties that are going to appeal to the masses, versus buying that one at 1.6. Whereas if someone's budget might be 950, you would say in that case, one good property is probably more appropriate than 2 at 425, because it's very hard to find a good house on its own land in a good area at 400,000. But it also comes down to not only their budget, their circumstances. So if that example with 950,000 purchase price, if they're on a really tight budget, yield could be important, and then it might mean just saying buying closer to 600 where you can buy in an area with a higher yield, at a lower price point. It's going to be easy to carry that. So when you do make your second purchase, you've got good performance of rental yield across the portfolio. Yeah, so, 7 really good sort of takeaways there. If nothing else from this episode, remember that property success isn't about buying more properties. It's about buying the right properties in the right order, in the right markets that fit your portfolio. If you found this episode helpful, follow, subscribe to the channel. We're going to build maybe a bit of a series here and do another episode that follows on from this with property myths.
Yep.
So if you're serious about investing and wanting to start and build a portfolio, having a repeatable decision framework and process that you follow is going to help you remove as many errors from the purchase as possible, and really strip away all that emotional approach to property, which can be, highly expensive. Reach out, Discover Buyers Agency. Most people will be able to find us, book in for an appointment or give me a call. Love to speak with anyone that's interested in having that chat. Nadia, it's been great.
Thanks, Kane. That was
awesome.
great.
Thank you.
Bye.